And I guess, you know, Mary was on the way, so I stopped that.
Gentlemen,
Very good. You got a ticket to Beijing, right?
I do have a ticket.
My wife has it.
You're more likely to get a reasonable price ticket now.
Oh, really?
Yeah, I wouldn't wait till the end. Probably maybe like TSQA and so, and they, I don't think they pay bus tickets.
No, that's not.
Yeah, so if it's cheap, then it's worth the extra $300 or $400. But it's not worth the extra 3,000.
How you doing? Good to see you. I'm glad you can make it. Great. Okay, yeah, that's great. Maybe if you have some cognitive issues, show the work you're working on. You can be here. Yeah, if you want to, if you want to have a no, that's fine. Everyone knows that. Sorry. What are you guys using this for? I don't think they're It's falling apart. Yeah.
You?
Like a wall?
Yeah. You want?
It's a strong work of conservation or constipation. New MacBook or
Hey. Hi. Hi. Nice to meet you. Yeah, so this whole bar.
Yeah.
5 pixel high, 1,000 pixel wide. This is great.
Oh, so you can dynamically.
Yeah, but it's
Not that he hits escape. I mean, all the time, but it's not like there's a part type.
At least says yes.
The one that you don't
He's the
ever
only
get
one
to hit.
who uses it.
I had all one.
Escape it email.
Have you not used, He's often said.
Meta. Meta, not escape.
You know how old I am?
Yeah, meta. Where's your meta key? Yeah, but you don't have meta key.
But the thing is, I've used this finger for the escape key for like at least 35 years.
All I'm saying is that nobody should complain about the escape key going away because it's the meta key away. I'm going to bitch about that.
Oh, yeah. I do, but yeah, new ones won't follow me.
Oh, I don't know. I just don't train, I guess. They run Linux.
Well, the demo is good.
Still going to be escape. They make any others.
It's smaller, it's fatter, I just didn't want to buy it.
Work. Okay, so hopefully we're going back in here. My name is Jason Kenny. I'm doing a talk on testing, basically TSQA v4. So before I get started, I should basically explain sort of my state here. Murphy's been going against me all week. As you see, I've been beaten up by 5 ninjas, and then they poisoned me and lost my voice. So I've been dedicated to this cause, trying to make sure we can get better testing in for the team. So this is what the talk's about today. So first of all, we need to talk about why are we, TSQA v4. So what's wrong with v1, v2, v3, right? Testing is not exactly an easy thing to do for larger systems like proxy servers or cloud-based systems. And one of the issues that have come up here is that, what were these goals that we're trying to do with the testing, and why are we doing this v4? So the goals really quickly here are this. There's probably more goals, but I think these are sort of hit the primary items that we were trying to fix. We're trying to make sure it's, we want to make sure it's easy to run the tests. We've always had issues with the systems being used. They're hard to run up, hard to set up. We want to be able to run all the tests, a subset of the tests. In the past systems, various success that that's happened. We want to make sure it's easy to automate and run manually. As a developer, you want to be able to verify that the code you're making doesn't break anything, right? You want to be able to run the test locally. And at the same time, you want to make sure you can throw it through a CI system and make everything happen right. For various reasons, that was not exactly achieved as much as people would like. The next item here would be, I think it's probably the biggest one here. People hate writing tests. I mean, as developers, we like writing code, and the things we tend to hate to do as developers is writing tests. And then I think the next thing we hate the most is documentation. I think documentation is my least favorite thing to do than writing tests, than writing code, whatever. But it's all about how you want to do things. For open source projects, people are very good about submitting bug fixes, but they're not very good about submitting a test to verify that they didn't break stuff. They sort of like, it's just trust me. Oh, it worked in my production system. And then we get it in there, and then we find out another company's production system's having issues. So we like to be able to try to prevent those issues. And likewise, this has led to like issues in the past where we'll do a 5.0 drop, and people say, let's go to 5.0. 5.0 has bugs in it, and we have to get to 5.1, 5.2, 5.3, and 5.3 stable. So then we get a 6.0 dropout. Well, we don't trust 6.0 because it's probably unstable like it was in the past. So we'll do 6.1, 6.2, then we'll take it in, right? So this allows, or makes it very difficult for people to adopt better code because they don't have any proof that it actually is working better. So hopefully the idea is to make it easier to add tests, write tests, get people in there to involve the community to make these tests happen. When you're writing the tests, as a developer, at least this is my big pet peeve, I love testing systems to say, oh, They run for a while, they hum, twirly things might happen, text flies back on the screen really quick. The next thing you know, you say, oh, it passed or it failed. And then if it failed, you're saying, so what failed? Go in some log files, look for something. You have to go figure out what that is. That doesn't help us, have fast continuous cycles. I mean, we have CI systems, and the classic development cycle is, you write code, you compile, you debug. Write code, compile, debug, you fix, right? And you want to do that as quick as possible. If you're doing a lot of diagnostics and figuring things out, you're not being very fast as far as getting things fixed. And that doesn't help anyone. Another big issue here is, and last two issues I'll hit on, is with the diagnostics, obviously, if something goes wrong, you sort of want to know what went wrong here. So, but like a big problem is that we tend to do assert testing. So by assert testing, we do some stuff and we assume everything before the assert was going to go right. And then we do the one thing that we're going to assert and then see what happens. But if the process didn't start or something else went wrong, we're all sort of like, oh, I don't know what happened. You might get some weird exception. So we like to be able to make sure that when you're writing your tests, you want to make sure that the notion of what's supposed to be happening, all those little stages and steps are automatically being verified and tested. And if they go wrong, it would be very nice if the system could say, hey, I was, trying to start TSQA, not TSQA, but I'm trying to start traffic server or traffic manager or traffic cop. It didn't start right. So that curl request you're trying to do to verify that plugin's working right, we could never get there because we couldn't start the process. And that helps us a lot when we're trying to understand what is wrong and how to correct the problem we're trying to solve. Another thing here is testing systems should be extensible. We all work at different companies, and our different companies have different things that we like to do. And we all think our company's things are the best or the worst, depending on your point of view. The main point here is that we want to make sure that the system can be extended and added onto to make test writing easy if you're doing it to the open source side or just internally in your company. You want to make sure that you can add those domain-specific things in there. So these were sort of a quick overview of all the goals we had. So what is TSQ v4? This is a slightly different approach from what's been done in the past. The method I'm trying to use here on this thing is to say I'm going to use a system that I've written at a previous job at Intel and was able to open source it. And they let me keep it, so I said, have fun with it. So I said, awesome. So it's called Reusable Goal Testing System. These are the links for it. We have some documentation for it. Hopefully it's not complete utter garbage. It's somewhat useful for people. Like I said, documentation is not my favorite thing. And then we have a set of extensions. And these are extensions to the main testing system to make it easier for us to write tests for traffic server. And I'll be going over a lot of what those things are. A little bit more detail here. So what is Reusable Goal Testing System? It's a really long name, and it doesn't sound like a really nice thing to say. It's a testing system that's based on trying to do goal-based testing. If you know what that is, it's, you have some sort of output file, and you have a gold file that's supposed to be what you expect to see as the matching output. It works generally well for TSQA. We have a couple other feature sets that are in there to help make sure we can do wildcard matching, so we can look for stuff that we want to do, or we can do regular expression matching, among other types of things. This testing system was, started as a project of mine that was called Parts. It was this build extension for a system called Scons. While I was at Intel, the testing system became sort of useful, and other teams wanted to start using it, so we pulled it out and started making its own project. At that time, it was called G-Test, and this was before Google came around and called something G-Test 2. So it turned out when I was saying we need to go open source this independent of the parts code, we couldn't call it G-Test, so I wanted to call it various different things, but the lawyers at Intel said, well, you're going to call it Reusable Goal Testing System, because that's apparently a legal safe thing to say. So now it's Reusable Goal Testing System, and I keep it that way because, I don't want to mess with lawyers a lot. Since then, we've, since I've gotten this stuff done, there's been various fixes to adapt testing to other types of systems and, make it easier for us to do the stuff with a traffic server. So since my last talk, we've made a number of improvements. So quick rundown of the improvements. We have made it easier to start multiple processes, having process control chains and stuff like that, so we can define, I want to run this process and that process and that process in a certain order and make sure that there's certain maybe conditions for saying that something is ready to start before we actually start it. We have improved the goal tester ability to do wildcard selections with the these curly bracelet stuff. We've actually added 2 back quotes in because it turned out curl likes to do curly bracelets a lot when you're doing H2 support. That makes it very difficult to make the wildcards work right with the diffing logic. We've added support for some custom file types, so you can extend it. So, for example, we have a custom file type extension. I'll talk about it in a bit when we go over what the extensions are for dealing with the records config, for example. That's based on excellent work Thomas had done in the previous version of TSQA 3. We have, be able to write out data, let's see here. Things of note here. We've standardized all the event systems. These are more internal things here to make sure things will be easier to extend and move things around. We've added a lot of extensibility to the system, and I've added a first stab at trying to do a good replay mechanism. Ideally, when you're running the test, something fails, you want to be able to go back and replay each of the stages. And maybe you want to go bring up the debugger and say, oh, let's go take a look what's going on inside because it's crashing and it may be some unknown reason that's, you really need to go debug it for. So instead of having to go recreate the test outside the testing system, you can just run it within the sandbox area via scripts that will be generated. So what about the test for ATS? So first, let's talk about what most tests look like for ATS. This is sort of a high-level abstraction. You could argue there's different types of things we can test. For the most part, we have ATS in the middle. We love ATS. It's the center of the universe for many of us. And on the sides, we have clients and we have servers, and we pass data back and forth. So this is sort of how tests will generally look. And then we may have some config files that we want to, say, control things, and the config files might load plugins in. So from the semantic, you might imagine that I have a plugin, I want to test it. The system should work nicely for that. You just, make some config files to load up your plugin with ATS, and you'll set some stuff up to say, I want to send some data through to the server or back. Maybe you don't even need a server. Maybe the plugin just sends stuff back to the client. All depends on what your plugin does. And you can look at the response and say, did it do the expected behavior I expect to see? And as long as the output has some sort of form or something gets logged so you can verify that it did the behavior you expect, we can test it. So this slide, I don't want you reading the text. It's not meant to be read. It's meant to be more of an illustration of sort of, hopefully, we're making iterative improvements on work that people have worked hard on in the past. So here's the previous TSQA, how a test would look like. So it's 1 of 2 pages, so I'm just trying to get the illustrator that you would have to write all this stuff. And if I port this test over to the new system, we can fit it on one nice page. Font's a little bit bigger, and hopefully it's a little bit more clear about what's going on versus the previous version. So this is just mostly an illustration to say that we've made some improvements. Hopefully it's a little more decorative, a little bit more terse, and a little bit more to the point as far as being able to say what you would like to say. So what's the main differences between what would be tested in this test from the current and the previous? The previous, we would have basically tested, both systems were trying to verify this sort of behavior. This was a cache generation test. We were trying to verify that, if a certain URL goes through, certain information would come back and it would be hit and missed, properly. In both cases, they test the generation to make sure that the cache generation codes were -1s, 1 or 2s, and then they came back as misses and then hits. So it did the test, and we get that value. So it's like, yay, that's great. However, there's some other stuff that we've been able to test now, and you didn't have to write anything really extra. In fact, we wrote less to get some extra behavior out of it. We were able to verify the traffic server started. So if traffic server didn't start, we get an error message, and we say something about that, about why traffic server didn't start. Given traffic server ran, we checked to make sure there's no errors in diagnostics.log. So, maybe it ran and some stuff went through, but error messages came out, from something else. Those will show up, and they'll show up in the nice reports. You can say, hey, something is going wrong here. We shouldn't be seeing error messages. We basically, we do extra passes on the generation 1 and 2 pass hits here. We check the return codes of the clients and stuff like that. So if we were unable to send the request for some reason, we get error codes back on that. I think before, if something went wrong, it would just throw an exception or something along those lines. And those are good, but ideally it's just a little different here. We check some other header states as far as what we expect to see in the gold files. So we're not just checking that those generation codes, we're also checking that we see ATS and some other values are there in the form that we expect to see. And I think that's sort of a summary of this row, what's all there. So there's improvements there, and even if they're extra. So hopefully that's a good thing. So tests, what would a very basic test would look like if I was trying to write a test here. So here's a quick illustration of a very simple test. And this is sort of more documented of an actual test we have in the system at the moment. So this test is just trying to say, I just want to make sure I can run traffic server, and that it runs. I send a call request that comes back with the expected, I don't know what you're talking about thing, but it came up and ran. So does traffic server actually run at the moment, or is it going to core dump because there's something really wrong with it at the moment? So first thing, we define a test. There's this test object, and we can define a summary, which I highly recommend everyone do as a BKM. This would basically say, what is this test doing here? So this test, test that traffic server starts with default configurations. That's what we really want to see. We go off and we can make a traffic server process. So this is an extension function we've added in because that's something, as an ATS developer, we want to make ATS processes a lot, so we made an extension to make that happen. That comes back with an object, which is the process we have here. The other thing that I should make note of, though, is TS is actually a namespace. It's added to the process namespace, in a sense that's an object. So we can use up here, we have P, but down here I'm using test process TS. And those all refer to the same thing. So it's all about, how you want to say it and, your styling feelings at the moment. We all, as programmers, might want things more programmatic or variable. Some of us may just want to be able to be, more declarative but verbose. This testing system is based on the idea that we have, when we create a test, you have a test, and a test has multiple steps you want to do. So in this case, we're just going to do one step. We just want to run traffic server. We want to make sure that something runs with traffic server. So we defined our process already. We're going to now make a test step, which we call test runs, and we're going to test the traffic server started properly. And we're adding this other test right here. We're saying that we want to make sure that after this test run is done, we're wanting to say that, traffic server is still running. Because it shouldn't have died. It should still be running. It should be going here. And then from there, we have our test run, and we have this notion of processes. These are the things that we're going to be running for each test step. And we have a built-in default. And defaults are the default thing you want to run. We have a command, and I'm going to give it a curl request. So we have a curl request here. We're going to pop in the port value we're doing, which was dynamically selected as part of the ATS process. So we can run things concurrently and in parallel so they don't clash. And that's what we're going to want to have run. And then we're going to define that, I want to make sure that default process, return back error code 0. Because, Perl is really nice in the sense that if something went wrong, it's going to return back a different error code. And the error codes are actually very different based on the behavior of what the response was back. So I think 404s and, 200s all give back different error codes, 202s, whatever. But and then from there, we want to be able to say, we want to tell the system, because this is sort of declarative here. We're not actually running anything. We're just sort of describing what we're going to do. We want to go off and say, I have this process, my default process, and I want to start some stuff before I start this process. So I want to start this traffic server process. So the traffic server process is going to start before we do it. But traffic server is going to start up here. So the next line right here, or a little bit here, is saying that we have this notion of readiness, right? If I'm going to start something before me, how do I know that thing that I started before me is ready so I can start myself and do my own actions? So we have this when namespace, just because it's sort of nice English-wise. It's ready when port's open. And ideally, we can add other types of functions to this when space. So when you're reading the test, we're ready when the port that's provided by this process is open. This is important because ATS will now start up, and it might take a second reading some config files up, and then it's going to get to the point where it says, okay, the port's open. Great. Then the testing system is going to go through and say, now I'm going to run my default process. I'll run the curl command. Curl command will now succeed because the ports are open, and we'll see what happens with the results after that. Once the test is done running, it makes a result, a nice little report saying what happened. And I'll show that in a demo a little bit later. Oops, sorry, wrong way. So we've added a number of extensions, and that's part of this ATS test repo that I have at the moment that will be pulled into as a pull request, hopefully within the next couple of days, into Traffic Server itself. So it should be very simple for everyone to just get it and run it. We've added a command line option here for the system to say ATS bin. What's the point of ATS bin? Unlike previous TSQAs, and Thomas said, I think I explained before, that you can do this with some working, but it wasn't maybe very clear to a lot of people. One of the features we wanted to be able to do here on this improvement was to say, well, we want to be able to run all these tests against my version of ATS. So at Yahoo, we have our nice special Yahoo build of ATS. I'm sure Lincoln has their own special build of it. Apple has their own. Comcast has their own. And they may be using some of the standard layouts, or they may be doing modifications to the layouts. And they may have special configuration files and such in them. So when we run the test, we want to make sure that this build, whatever special patches are in there, will still pass all the testing. So the ATS bin allows us to point the testing system to the build of ATS you want to run or test against, and it'll test all the stuff against that. And it's very nice because now you can go off there and very simply run all the tests against 6.2 build and a 7.0 build, or my special patch fix something branch. And it will pass or fail based on the results of the testing. We've added some extra test features in here, though, as well. I should just add really quick. Brian Call helped me test this stuff a little bit, and we discovered he had an interesting build, which traffic layout just blew up. So hopefully we'll get good diagnostic messages that if you give it a bad path or traffic layout isn't working properly, it will stop the test, and we should get that fixed before you try to continue testing. We've also added a number of API functions to deal with environments, set up functions for dealing with config files. And functions to create. Looks like something weird. I didn't catch it. To deal with origin servers, and the functions to deal with origin servers is based on work that we've talked about beforehand. Something called traffic replay, which will be talked about with Persia, I think tomorrow. But we've pulled in some of that code into the testing framework, primarily a microserver, to help deal with origin servers. So I'm just going to go over the extensions here. Hopefully I'll make this somewhat quick so it's not too boring. We have this function we talked about, make ATS process. This will go through the process of defining a bunch of log files, squid log, air log, diagnostic log, all the config files that we should have. I think I have them all, but we have a lot of config files. It will define by default 4 different ports, port for v4, port for v6, a manager port, and a min port. It will dynamically try to select these things to make sure that we have a unique port value. This allows us to run multiple processes at the same time. And we'll see here, we also process the environment. So we process environment variables so we can basically make sure ATS is running in the proper sandbox. So instead of using the config values, we're using the config values as environment variables, and that should allow everything to run independently and correctly and reproducibly. Here's a quick example of it here, how you might use it. I'm going to go through the process here and, make an ATS process. Likewise, we're showing a little example here that, I want to add to some data here to records config. So I'm just going to update it with this dictionary here of these key values that we have. Much like Thomas's case, the value of these things in Python per se, because this is sort of Python code underneath the covers, is going to describe how the config file will be written out. So if I took and made this quote 1, it's going to write out into the config file, config, this key, string, and then 1. So as an extension, this makes it a little easy for us to define what we want to extend or modify for the test run, and then it'll go off and do the nitty-gritty for us. Again, and it's just another example here, records config, you could do as a dictionary sort of type notation. So hopefully that should work really easy for everyone to write tests. Another quick example here is that, for other types of config files that don't have that special syntax, most of the other config files are, well, at the moment they're all different. And I think there's been talk, well, there will be a talk about what we're planning to fix that up, make it all more Lua-like. But until then, we have this, the ability for the other config values here, and I'll say just remap config as the example. We're going to go through here and we want to add some lines. So you're going to sort of write the lines, each line that you expect to add into the file itself. So in this case, we're just doing some remapping on, what we want for the cache generation, for example. And, we're saying that we're going to, map some things to a plugin. We have a function in here for copying config files over. Sometimes, depending on how you write the test, you want to write, like in this previous test over here, you might have cases where I just want to write config values into the file itself. Or maybe you want to add lines to the config file that's already there. Otherwise, you may just want to copy a config file over. You may have a bunch of tests that are sort of copy patterns of each other, and you have the same basic setup, but you're going to do different scenarios of inputs to verify things work as you expect. In that case, it may be very convenient to just be able to, define a config value file, a config file with the values you want in it. In this case, all you need to do is just you give it the input of the file you want, which would be where your test is defined, and you may want to say where it's going to be copied into with a certain name, but it'll copy into the sandbox correctly for that given process. So in this example right here, we notice we were assuming that we're making two different processes of ATS. They're going to have different sandbox directories. Case 1, TS will get records config that's going to open on port 8090, and this one's going to do 8091. Those will be copied over. You don't have to deal with all those details, so it's really quick and easy and fast to get something up and running. We've added, with a lot of help from Persia on this one, so I have to thank her on this, the ability to make origin servers. And there's a number of features we still want to add on to this area. But the main idea here is that, as an example here, we can, a nice little function, we can go create an origin server on the test object. We can define input-output headers that we want to do, and then you can define certain responses. So from how microserver works at the moment, it expects input files that define these input outputs you want. You just have to give it some name, and you can give it the values you expect to go in and out. Persia's put some nice work in here, so you can give it a nice dictionary of those sort of values of the header without having to do a lot of hard work. Yes?
Can you do things like insert delays in responses or that kind of thing? So respond with this content after 100 milliseconds?
Right now, I don't have that in the microserver, but this can be added. Yeah.
So yes, feature requests. So there's a lot of things I think we would like to add here.
Make a note.
We'll take notes on that. The microserver obviously was being primarily viewed as a way of doing back traffic replay stuff. And I think there was a response, I don't forget. There's a response time back for that, but we're trying to extend and change it to allow it to do other things. So I think that's a great idea. So this makes it very easy to, at least running a test, I want this goes in, this is what I expect to come back out. See what else we got here. So there's still a lot of stuff we would like to add on to extensions, and this is just a small list. I think actually the list is technically bigger after yesterday's talk we had with everyone at the devs talking about the stuff. But I believe there'll be a bunch of items based on feedback that people may have that we want to add in. We would like to maybe add a better curl function to make it easier to find the curl calls, because most of the tests will just be calling curl. In a sense, curl is a good tool to use the stuff instead of writing our own, but make it easier to not have to write all the elements out nicely. Better service response APIs, have it take wildcards is one of the thoughts, and apparently James would like us to add some delays. These are all good ideas. And we're going to add a traffic replay client function in there, so we can do the traffic replay notions underneath this framework as well. And I'm sure there's plenty of other things we could want to have. I mean, it's as being an extendable type system, there will be always something else we want to add at some point. So I'm sure that'll grow. So what's next? Well, for me, the core system is not exactly perfect yet. I still need to fix the .j option to make everything run parallel properly. I didn't quite get time to do that. Primarily, it's sort of, as we were writing all these very basic tests, we were going through a 7.0 drop of ATS. So that was being branched by Ryan Call. And I was testing all the basic tests I had as I was writing them, and we would find bugs. So master branch would break, and then I'd go back to 6.2, and it would work, or it might break. So there were just a lot of unstable issues, and then we discovered a number of other problems with, bootstrapping ATS properly, or, traffic control didn't handle certain environment variables rights. So we've opened a number of JIRAs on that already. So even with a handful of tests I think we have ready to go in, when I just had like 5 of them, we were already opening a number of JIRA issues and finding problems that we need to do. So that's success, I think, already. Some various bugs. There's some tweaking I want to do, based on stuff Leif has given me already, that he would like to have some stuff suppressed better. So we'll make those type of tweaks. I need to add some common report format stuff, primarily to help deal with, report format output, so we can deal with stuff like Jenkins or other types of systems, so we can report our test results to them. And of course, address user feedback. And of course, as we all want everyone to write tests now as a community, I'm running a system for everyone to do it. I'm not running all the tests. We need everyone to, come together and start helping writing tests. I hear, B-Call maybe going around with a bat and, we'll do this to you, right here, if you don't, write your test right. At least that's what Leif might want to do instead. But it'll all get better with all our help. So we have a little bit of demo here I can give out. So let's see if I can get that to go. Okay, see if I can make this bigger. Yep, that went the wrong way. Is that big enough, or can you make it bigger?
Your pipe broke.
My pipe broke? Is it big enough? Yeah. Okay. Pipe broke, so now, of course, my demo's not going to take longer here, so... All right, so there would be a basic command to run the actual testing, an actual test here. So you're going to run AU tests. ATS bin is pointing to a build that I already have made here. So I actually have a couple different builds of ATS, so I could show if people care. I can show that it's running off of master, or it's running off of 6.2 or something like that, or 7.0 branch. We have a sandbox thing we're adding here. We've talked about this a little bit, and I'm not sure I was going to go for it, but at the moment you want to add a sandbox and give it a very short directory. This is because for certain tests we need to, traffic server will be running tests to run traffic manager, traffic cop, and they require Unix domain sockets to talk, and there's a path length limitation they have. And in general, if you run it in your home directory with all the other stuff that we add on to the sandbox, it'll be just like 3 or 4 characters too long, and then it'll fail to run. So that's just unfortunate, just the way it is. So, it's pretty much that should be the main thing. You start running all the tests here. So we see test run. So it's exciting. It's testing. So we don't get too thrilled about it. There'll be some stuff we'll do to speed things up, because right now it's waiting a little timeout that's a little bit too long to kill ATS before going to the next test. The basic format you'll see here is that we'll have dots will be passed. If there's an exception or a failure, you'll see an E or an F will show up. And there'll be some nice coloring, stuff like here. So, as it runs, it sort of does this thing here. Likewise, some tests will be skipped. That's one of the features we have. So tests can be skipped. We have the ability to say tests are going to maybe, you may want to suppress them. You might want them suppressed as a warning, possibly. So you can say, something's going on here, and we can warn, and that can report out. There should be, I think, a failure in here at some point. So I tried to make sure it mocked up a nice failure, but this takes about 4 minutes, supposedly, to run at the moment. It should run faster once I get some other stuff fixed. So let's see if this one passes or fails. So it's going here. So, and ideally, we'll get a J option to make everything work correctly. The other notion I should also point out here, too, is that the sandbox directory is where everything's running. So if something fails, the sandbox directory will stay around with the name of the test that was part of the sandbox directory. So you can go back in there and run things, and I'll show that in a little bit for the supposedly failed test here. And each test step will pop out a little dot here. We also have a number of command line options and stuff to do stuff for veracity. If I was throwing verbose options, you'll see some stuff going on as we were doing each of the stages. And I can give a quick example of that later on. We can also then filter and not run all the tests, which might have been a little bit better here in this case. But we only have a few tests, so it's almost there. So I think right now we're supposed to fail on the H2 test. That was on purpose, not because I'm trying to pick on Percha for all hard work on making the H2 tests we've been adding in, but I just thought I'd just add something in there as a failure.
Is there a log file where we can see what's actually going on with the tests?
Yes, so I don't want to run the tests. I'll rerun one of the tests and I'll show that for you. But yeah, we have a -- verbose and a -- debug option. Okay, and those will basically dump up a bunch of stuff. So what you'll be seeing here, for example, like it's waiting to kill. So you're saying, I'm going to kill XYZ process, whatever that process name is, right? And then as it goes along, you see everything happened. And since a lot of verbosity can come out and just move the screen out, you may only care about maybe a little bit of the data. So all the verbose messages have these little tags on them. And you can basically give it, say -- verbose, tag 1, tag 2, tag 3, tag 4. And only those messages will show up then. So you can move things out. So for example, we have this wonderful tag that's like process output. So you can just pop out process output, and as the text runs, you see things go on. So H2 failed as we expected. Yay. Gremlins didn't break this one for me, so that's good. So we should be just about there once this thing kills off. And yes, so we have an option to basically it would be -- filter -f, and you'll see it in the -- help there, right? In the filter, you give it basically a name of a test, or you can give it a directory with like a wildcard, and you can run one test or a set of tests that way.
Yeah, the help message there's a little thin. It just says filter.
Yeah, so I mean, there's always something to fix. So I mean, as running a tool, I mean, I've written tools a lot, and I've always decided that it would be wonderful if we came up with a brain reading device, so we just knew what you wanted to do and just write code for that to happen. But you get a report here, and we see that, as the stuff was running, we had the H2 fail. And we come over here, and we see that we had 2 tests that were skipped, and the reason is the tests fail at the moment, so they're turned off because they're supposed to be failing. And we need to go fix that, but I left one on here that's failing for a different reason. So here we see there's a bunch of things that happened. So, there's a bunch of copies and stuff like that happened. And they passed, and then we get down over here, and we had a failure here, and we can see that, we see there's 2 failures. One, that the gold file test that we're trying to test against with these wildcards that failed, none of these lines showed up. They were just all missing. And then likewise, the return code was 1. So, right here, we sort of know that something potentially is wrong with the output, and it most likely just failed to run, period, which is what happened in this case. A library was missing, so it just didn't run. And then we have a quick little summary at the end.
So if you go to that data file, that's still on your disk.
Yes, so at this point then, we can see if I can type nicely with one hand here. We can go to the sandbox, and I'll just, we see the HB2 test is there. And we see some stuff in there. So we see the HB2 client that was copied over as part of the test. We see a sandbox for the server, or a little directory for where the server has data files in. And then we have these other _temp things, and these are basically where all the output data is at. So for example, let's say I want to go rerun the server exactly the same way that it was run for this test. All I need to do is I would just, we can just go over here and run the remap. No, this is the right test here. Got to make sure. So I can go to this directory right here, and inside there we have a replay script. And I can just run it. And this is exactly what would happen if, with the test ran, basically. And you can run it all manually in different command prompts and such, and then repeat the stages for all the stuff as it went on. So in some cases, it may be just you want to run the server, but now you want to run, we'll start up traffic server, and we can do that and see what happened with that in a different prompt. I'll just Control C out of this for a moment. And likewise in there, we can also then see other outputs. So I'll just pop out one thing here. I don't know if there's anything in this file here. Let's do one I know there'll be something in. So this is just like all the text, the standard error plus standard out. And we separate standard error out into different files as well, but you can see the dump there. So when you're diagnosing things, you can go in there and you can see sort of what happened as part of the test and try to figure out what's going on. There was a question beforehand, which I would like to try to show at this point, which would be the, I want to see some more data about what's going on here. So if I don't give it a tag, it's just going to print everything out. So I'll just do verbose here really quick here, and we'll do one filter on one test. I'll just do basic at this point. So we're just going to run the basic test here. And we see, outputs flying back and forth about, sort of what's happening and where everything's at. So we see we finished, test run here, and we're stopping processes owned by test, and then those will stop, and then we'll finish out and print out the report and see everything passed. And if I want to, for example, just reduce what I want to see here so that I don't care about all that stuff, I'm trying to figure out what's going on with the processes, for example, I can, if we come over here and I can pop in process. That's the tag up there and the thing, and all of a sudden all the verbose messages will just be process. So that can be useful. So we'll see out really quick here. Another nice one, too, I should add is we have debug as well here, so I'll just do a quick example of that. So here we have process output coming out there, and we can see the process output showing up on the screen. Unfortunately, that should be in different lines. I'll look at why that broke. But that can be very useful then when you're trying to figure out what's going on with stuff. Yeah, any process that's running at that given time. We can. As such, I was on my list of things. I got items we want to fix. So let's see if I can get out of this real quick here. So here's the website. Here's documentation we have for it at the moment. As you see, I do have a number of issues that have been already opened up, or I've opened up, things we want to do. So there's a lot of low-hanging fruit to fix. My main goal right now was trying to make sure we had a better engine running so we could start getting tests written today versus yesterday, and then we can fine-tune these small little tiny things like, better process outputting or being able to list what tests exist and such going forward. If you have any issues or suggestions or feature requests you would have, just go to the website and open an issue, and we'll take care of it from there. Question?
So I think you mentioned that it's living in Bitbucket now, and I didn't quite understand what your plan is for repos and where all these things are going to live and what lives where.
Right, so that's a really good question here. So the plan for that is that. So there's actually sort of two repos here. So there's also then the, these are the tests or the prototypes that we have, right? This is going to be pulled, this repo right here, this is going to become part of a pull request into the GitHub traffic server, okay? So all the tests, all the extensions will be in here. So that stuff will be defined there. The engine will stay where it's at. The way this code is supposed to be set up here, and I'll just show it really here since it's easy enough. Tests is basically the directory we're going to pull in underneath traffic server. And underneath there we have this nice little bootstrap script that will hopefully check everything out. And what it's going to do is it's going to do a pip install into a sandbox by default, or you can do more advanced stuff yourself. of the AU test package. So we have a package set up. I'm going to make an updated package of AU test, and that'll be in PyPy, and you'll just be able to install from there. Or if you want to, you can do a more direct GitHub Pip install type, or you can do Pip install with Git, right? So you can give it an actual branch or location or commit point, and you can just Pip install from that point in time. So the main engine code still will be online. It's going to be its own open source entity for people to use, not just for ATS, but for other types of systems you may want to use it for. And things will hopefully grow from there, right? So that was the goal. So the point of separation I should clarify, though, is that all the extension code and all the tests for ATS will be inside ATS, right? The engine's a separate thing that'll be outside ATS, but the ATS will have scripts to pull that engine in to run it.
Have we decided where in the ATS source code this is going to go?
Yeah, tests.
Tests?
Yes.
All right.
I made this as simple as I possibly could. I mean, the goal is to say that, I'm going to go up on here. Tests. That directory, I'm going to check out traffic server, copy tests into it, commit all that stuff, pull request, and you'll see test directory added and with all the stuff in it. I wasn't going to try to come up with some weird new scheme. I mean, I had in my talk already on complaining about how source code layout was done. Where's the source? Where's this source file? I don't know. So, I would preferably like to have at some point ATS refactor a little bit, so we had a source directory and source code for building ATS was underneath source in some organized fashion. It is what it is right now. So right now I'm going to at least attack tests and make sure tests are underneath one directory, so everyone knows where to find them and knows where to add them.
I had a question. So is there a way to make this work with transparent interception?
Sorry, with what again?
Right now you showed us an example where the client is explicitly connecting to the ATS proxy that's been set up, right?
Right.
Is there a way to do this transparently? I'm using some IP rules which would redirect the request to the ATS proxy that's being set up, because it will test a different code path in terms of how ATS.
Yeah, that's an interesting question. I think you're probably going to have to build your own extension to do the IP tables manipulations.
Because the concern is custom transparent, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, but it's going to have to be special, because setting that up you can probably script it up well enough to say, set up these rules and then tear them down afterwards, because you can't get the ports that it's running on.
Set up containers.
Yeah, put it in a namespace. Put it in a network namespace, do whatever you want.
Yeah, network namespace.
Can you put the IP rules in the namespace? Yeah, that's what they do.
Namespace is nice. Something that you have in your network.
You can do network transparency namespace. All right. What OS are you running on?
Right now it's pretty old, SL6, but we are moving to CentOS.
Since I said
Use Docker containers to do that.
network containers, network namespace.
Okay.
Yeah, I don't think 6 has network namespaces working right.
You don't need Docker to do this. Just you can use the command line tools instead.
Yeah. Right.
Get a reset.
But I should need to clarify here. I mean, obviously the point here too of the system is trying to make it so, we have a set of open source tests, right, that exist. And other companies are going to want to run those open source tests on their own systems. And the idea is that they can use the same system to extend stuff on their own end, right? And not have to share that to the open source community, right?
I think it would be nice to share it back. It's just that.
Well, we would like to, but there's these things called lawyers that might get in the way, right? Or you might have secret sauce you're trying to test and you want to write an extension for your secret sauce, right? So I'm trying to make sure we can do both, right? So we can sort of keep a common system running that saves us all time and effort, in a sense, right? So is there any other questions?
Sort of following on from that, does the framework have the capability to do like a third test, set up and tear down to bracket the execution itself?
The test run basically runs, per test there is a setup and a teardown, right? So I'm not sure what you're asking.
So I have a test which contains multiple steps in it.
Right.
The test brings up ATS, does a bunch of stuff. Is there a way to express, do this test, but I want to before, when I do that test in the network namespace, I want to create a namespace, run the test, and then tear down the end of the test, or if the test fails.
Oh, like a network namespace thing?
Yeah, so can I, like...
Theoretically, yes. I haven't... So there was actually this whole thing with ports, right? We were talking about yesterday, and one of the ideas was we're just going to do stuff with namespace porting and all stuff like that. But we run Red Hat EL6 at the moment, so it doesn't work there. So we went with the solution that was based on what Thomas had done, which was something that doesn't require that. I try to put stuff in there, so this should be something we should be able to do. I haven't fully tested it, so there may be some hiccups that we have to deal with.
Yeah, I guess it's just like,
the design's intended to make this happen.
When the test fails, are there hooks to tear down any external state that you constructed during
Yes,
the test?
we have cleanup events. So yeah, so we have there's 3 layers. There's the test layer, there's sort of the test run, and the process, right? Each of these objects have basically a started, or a setup, started, running, finished, and cleanup event. I think that's all of them.
So you can get a cleanup event that you can kind of tear down everything.
Yeah, you can do whatever you want to do. And by default, so that'd be like resource cleanup, and then anything on the file system, if the test passes, is going to be deleted anyways. Unless there's a switch you'll use that will say keep it around for whatever reason. But the idea is if we have 10,000 tests, you don't want 10,000 directories in a sandbox directory. It's not very useful. If only one failed. Cool.
Is there a way to run the same test against the same server? So you can specify the server IP address and port number, so you can test with the server, not on binary which you're running on the test server.
Right. So at the moment, that's an interesting question there, and I think there's certain details that can make that difficult. So the idea is that when we're running a test, and I'll just start with the command prompt, we can come over here and I can say something like, this is the version of ATS I want to run. So I can point to different builds. So I think I have a 7 something in here.
Couldn't you just not find a TS process?
So we have the same problem with the current TSQA. The question, in general, in certain situations, it's pretty easy. In general, it's very hard. Your test case says, send this curl request, right? But it's got hard-coded all integration, whatever, we can template out the IP address. But then it also set up an origin server, right? So
yeah, I mean, the question here is saying that, I can go do this. I can run a different build, right? The idea of you're saying is that I have a running ATS, already running. It's in memory right now, and I just want to run my test against that running version of ATS, right? The problem is that depending on the test, we're setting up different config environment variables and such. We have different config files that are being used. And I should probably clarify this. I didn't say this, I think, right beforehand because I said Murphy's going against me today. Each test when we run it, we make up a unique environment for that thing. And the intention here is this, is that, I've seen this happen already, that, Yahoo, we have our special set of configuration files we want to have. They're part of our build of ATS. That can change as the default behavior from the default values that you get from open source ATS, right? And so it's not really unexpected that any other company would have that same thing happening for them. So when we run this ATS process, we're making in that sandbox a set of empty configuration files. So we're always running off the default values. So that way then, if you're trying to run a test and you're trying to test some behavior, you have to add values to configure that behavior you want to see. And that way then the tests are repeatable. And there's repeatable based on, ATS being laid out completely differently for Yahoo or Fedora or Debian, because, the directory layout structure is different there, right? So depending on those type of behaviors, we get reproducibility. The idea of saying that, I want to go have this ATS already running, I guess in a sense what you could do is you could say, well, I run all the tests, and then I go to that one test that I want to go rerun against my open running server, and you just rerun those steps manually for the replays in a little bit, right? And that would then depend on your thing. You might have to go modify to make sure it's pointing to the right port number or something. Because there's a lot of things that get set up, port numbers, config values, and we have a lot of config values, So just being able to say, I'm going to run all these tests that do all kinds of weird different things against one ATS server, that can be a little questionable.
Well, you could set up, if you want to just have, it's dual purpose, that's the problem. If you want to have a directory with live tests only, That's straightforward.
The fundamental issue with testing is two pieces. One, I can't really control that remote, but I can't see what state that remote server is in, so I don't know like what if speed is enabled or config options are on. So the tests themselves, right, like inherently have that. Like I have a mechanism because it's set the config, I know this is valid, so I can try.
Well, yeah,
and second being, if it's wrong, I can't change it or look at things.
Yeah, but what I'm saying is that if I know I have live servers out, we have our production servers, and I know what state they're in, I can have a separate directory that says, these are my live tests. They're intended to be running against a live system.
Right.
That would be easy to do.
That would be easy to do, assuming you figure out something. Right. Well, if your server isn't running with Speedy, right, then all the tests for Speedy I need to skip.
Yeah, but it's my test in Yahoo, and I know that we're not running Speedy.
But actually,
if you write your own shell script to it, but I mean, like as a generalized framework, it gets a little dicey.
Yeah, there's I think a lot of details here, but there are some things we've added in. I know Leif added in a feature into traffic layout to talk about feature sets that are enabled.
Right. Well,
so theoretically, given it's new enough, that could work. There's things we could do to make those things better. I agree with Thomas, though, that's if we had 10,000 tests, and especially 10,000 tests to run on a live system, that would be a problem. I can imagine, though, having such a setup where you could make that work given controlled circumstances on a reduced set of tests. So I think that should be a plausible thing in a way. But I think it just requires we have to make sure you understand what you're doing and you have a careful setup for it. Okay, any other questions? Yeah, great, then it'll be lunchtime. So really quickly here, I just want to say thank you so much for your time on this thing. I understand testing and infrastructure is not the most exciting thing in the world. Caching is much more interesting, right, Alan? I love those diagrams you have. Anyways, here's links for everything again. So, we have Bitbucket Reusable Testing System. It's an MIT license, so if you want to use it outside ATS testing for something else, feel free to do it. I always like to have more people use it. We do have documentation. Its documentation itself is its own GitHub at the moment, so because it's how the wiki's done on these Bitbuckets and GitHub things. So there's documentation, spelling errors, grammar errors. Feel free to tell me or make a fix, or add some documentation, and I'll be more happy to pull it in. And again, the pull requests will be done out of this branch over here, ATS tests. So feel free if you want to add some tests in really quick in the next couple of days, pop it in there, and we'll pull them into the main traffic server tests when we do that work. Anyways, thanks again for your time.